Hello everyone, Alexis would like to pass a message saying a huge thank you for the response from chapter 3 last week. He says thanks to the new subscribers and he would also like you to continue to try and achieve 150 subscribers. I, the storyteller, believe you can achieve this within 2 weeks. Try not to let me down, guys. A new routine implemented into Football Fairytales to try and increase the interaction with our readers. Whenever someone's suggested team gets included in today's chapter, their comment will be included and their channel will be shouted out and will be on the mystical eye. In today's chapter, Sidwu left a comment last week to cover his football club, Reading Football Club, and just like that, his channel is on the eye icon in the top right corner. Everyone subscribe to Sidwu, and today's chapter in his eternal book will be on history of Reading Football Club. Tell me, what club would you like to be featured in chapter 5 of Football Fairytales? Yesterday, Alexis announced that on Twitter, the contents page of Football Fairytales will be pinned on his Twitter page. If you are intrigued to see what the contents page is, check out the Twitter at Alexis0109. If you want any changes to the contents page, simply reply to the tweet and Alexis will deal with it. But please comment your suggestions to what you want in chapter 5 in the comments down below. But without any further ado, let's start chapter 4 of Football Fairytales, which is the history of Reading Football Club. We need to take it back to when this book began. In 1871, over 16 years before our first club Barnsley were made, Britain was filling with more and more established association clubs. In the top 2 divisions, the 4 oldest football association clubs in history are Stoke, Nottingham Forest, Sheffield Wednesday and Reading. We're looking at the county south of Basildon, Reading Football Club. They play their football today in the McGasey Stadium. We cover almost 150 years of ups and downs of this prestigious club. The club was established in 1871, making it one of the oldest professional teams in England. However, it took Reading nearly half a decade to join the Football League, eventually doing so in 1920. To find out what took them so long, let's look at the early stages of their development. Reading Football Club was formed precisely on Christmas Day 1871 by founder Joseph Edward Sydenham. They were originally nicknamed the Biscuit Men after one of the main trades in the town, Huntley and Palmer's Biscuits. Their nickname eventually changed to the Royals in 1970. That nickname was changed when the company closed their factory. Reading attempted to switch to be a professional club in 1895, resulted in the need of a bigger ground, which ended up to be their first home, Elm Park, where they played their first game in the 5th of September 1896. The first game of Elm Park was between Reading and A. Roston Burke's 11, which saw Reading leading 7-1 before the match was prematurely ended due to torrential weather. Quite a few years later, in 1913, before World War I, Reading toured around Italy. They beat Genoa 4-2 and AC Milan 5-0 and narrowly lost to Cassel before beating Italian champions Po Vercelli 6-0 and the full Italian national team 2-0. This tour was unfortunately followed by World War I, and unfortunately the war claimed lives of Alan Foster, who put a hat-trick past Milan. Other key players that they lost included Charles West and Herbert Slatter. Another key bit of history, Attilo Fresia moved to Reading as a result of the tour. He became the first ever Italian to play in British football. After World War I, Reading were elected in the 3rd division of the Football League in 1920, as the league absorbed the 1st division club of the Southern Football League. Now the club have spent the majority of the time since then in the 3rd and 4th tiers of the league, with occasional flirtations with the 2nd tier. Reading's best performance so far came in the FA Cup, where you'll see a trend of how good they are in the FA Cup. That first glimpse came in 1926-27, where when they lost to eventual winners Cardiff City at Molineux in the semi-final. The attendance at the 1-0 victory over Brentford in the 5th round set a new attendance record for Elm Park. 33,042 people remains the highest attendance at a Reading home match ever. Reading were promoted to the second division following a third division South title win in 1926. However, that success was short-lived. The Royals were relegated back to the third tier in May 1931. It was a low point for the club. But however, in the later stages of the 30s and the early 40s, the club achieved some silverware. The club defeated Bristol City to win the Southern Section Cup in 1938 under Billy Butler, and won the London War Cup in 1941 by defeating Brentford 3-2 in the final at Stamford Bridge under Reading's longest serving manager, which we learned from yesterday. He was called Joe Edelston. The club remained in Division 3 after World War II. However, under Ted Drake, they finished in second place in their division in 1948-49 and 1951-52. Despite looking promising to be promoted, they stayed in the third division throughout the 50s and the 60s. Good times were not coming any time soon. Unfortunately, Reading were relegated to the fourth tier of English football for the first time in the 1971-72 season. Luckily, a return to the third division was achieved following a third place finish in the 1975-76 season, led by Charlie Hurley. However, the club suffered immediate relegation in the following season. The 1978-79 season saw Reading win the fourth division under the management of Maurice Evans to win promotion back to the third division. Evans even set a Football League record by not conceding a goal in 1,074 minutes. Steve Deff was the goalkeeper that achieved that. He became the holder of the club appearance record with a total of 536 first team games in all competitions between 1969 and 1982. However, Reading throughout the 70s and the early 80s was showing similar traits to Barnsley's yo-yo trait. Relegation was suffered in 1982-83 and Reading were in grave danger. Administration and dissolution are dangerous terms we've learned so far that come to British football clubs. But we come across a new scenario of a threatened merger. Towards the end of that season, Oxford United chairman Robert Maxwell announced that he had completed a deal to merge Oxford and Reading into a single club and had managed to sell Elm Park. Maxwell claimed that both clubs were on the verge of bankruptcy and having a united team was required for the Royal Thames Valley region. That was how Reading were nicknamed the Royals, by the way. The proposed amalgamation was prevented by the actions of two people, Roy Tranter, a Reading director, and Roger Smee, a former Reading player. Tranter launched a legal challenge to the sale of certain shares on 22nd of April 1983. The supporters of the plan allies resigned under pressure from the rest of the Reading board in May 1983. Smee took over the club to end the amalgamation plans. Thankfully, Reading were kept separate and were not going to be merged with Oxford. Following the collapse of the merger plan, Reading got a new spring in their step and were promoted back to the third division at the end of the 83-84 season. This remains the last time the football club has actually competed at this level of English football, so Reading used their spring in their step very wisely. Reading won the league in the 1985-86 season under the management of Ian Branford, following a run of 13 successive wins at the start of the season, earning promotion to the second division. This was also the first time in 50 years that the club had played at this level. The club continued to strive for success. They reached their first major cup final in the 87-88 season, where they won the Simod Cup. They beat 4 top-flight sides to get to that final, and the club's first Wembley appearance saw the club victorious over First Division Luton Town with a 4-1 victory. But later in the season, the club were relegated back to the third tier. Bradford unfortunately left his job as a manager in October 1989, having failed to get the Royals back into the second division. However, his successor, Ian Porterfield, lasted just 18 months before further failures cost him his job. It looked like from this pattern Reading were going backwards. However, a proposed takeover was looming. The appointment of Mark McGee as player manager shortly after the takeover by John Medeski in June 1991 saw Reading move forward. They were crowned champions of the new Division 2 in 1994, seeing the club promoted to the second tier. Reading were even in contention for a second successive promotion. Jimmy Quinn was put in charge of the first team alongside midfielder Mick Gooding, and they guided Reading to runners-up in the final Division 1 table, but only to be denied by automatic promotion because of the streamlining of the Premier League from 22 teams to 20. Any other year they could have been runners-up, Reading would have been promoted, but they had to pick the wrong year to try and get runners-up in Division 1. They were so unlucky not to be promoted. Reading had to settle for a playoff place. They eased past Tranmere Rovers in the semi-finals and looked to have booked their place in the Premier League after building a 2-0 lead over Bolton Wanderers by half-time. However, 2 late goals from Bolton, forced extra time, and the match ended 4-3 to Bolton. 2 years later, Quinn and Gooding's contract were not renewed after Reading had slid into the bottom half of Division 1. Reading were looking like that they had run out of their momentum. The club were fighting to reach new heights though, and this followed with a new proposed stadium, named the Medeski Stadium, named after their current owner, John Medeski. Terry Bullivant took over as manager, and he lasted less than 1 season before being sacked in March in 1998. Royals finished in that season bottom of Division 1 in 1997 and 98, slipping back into Division 2 in the 3rd tier. Sadly, at their final season at Elm Park, joining them in relegation were fellow now Championship team Stoke City and Manchester City. The last ever competitive match played at Elm Park was a very emotional game against Norwich City in May 1998. Unfortunately, Reading lost 1-0 away from home, Craig Bellamy scoring the winner. Reading moved into the new 24,200 all-seater Medeski Stadium in August 1998. The club had won their first match at that ground, beating Luton Town by 3-0. Tommy Burns had taken over from Tenny Bullivant, but lasted only 18 months before being sacked in September 1999, a year before this voice entered the world. After a poor start to the season after the club's failure to win promotion the previous season, he was replaced by former reserve team manager by the name of Alan Pardew. Pardew all of a sudden had a spring in his step. He guided Reading to a 3rd place finish in the 2001 season, where the club were beaten in the playoff final by Walsall 3-2 after extra time. Reading just do not have the luck in playoff finals. Later on in 2001, Reading became the first football club to register their fans as an official member of their squad, giving the player registered with the squad number 13 as Reading fans. A funny little fact not many of you may have known. Reading returned to Division 1 in the 2002-03 season after finishing as runners-up in Division 2. Final day draw away at promotion rivals Brentford saw the club promoted. The following season, they finished 4th in Division 1 and qualified for the playoffs, when they lost in the semi-final to eventual playoff winners Wolverhampton Wanderers. Pardew, following his unbelievable success with Reading, he moved to West Ham United in the following October. He was then replaced by Brighton and Hove Albion manager Steve Coppell. You would have thought that Coppell had a load of pressure to try and build up what Pardew started, but Coppell did one better than Pardew. He took the Royals to 7th place in his first full season with the club, missing out on the place in the playoffs by 3 points, agonising. But it was only a couple of years later when Reading hit their peak. Reading won the 2005-06 championship with a league record of 106 points, scoring 99 goals and losing only twice, in which were to Plymouth in the opening day and a dramatic 3-2 defeat to Luton Town. Promotion to the Premiership was assured on the 25th of March 2006 with a 1-1 draw away at Leicester City. The following Saturday, the club secured the title with a 5-0 thumping of Derby County, with a young Shane Long scoring a brace. The 2006-07 season saw Reading make their first appearance in the top flight of English football in the Premier League. Striker Dave Kitson became the first player to score for Reading in the top flight, as the Royals came from 2-0 down to beat Middlesbrough 3-2 in their first game in the Premiership. Reading were defied pre-season predictions of relegation. However, they finished in 8th place with 55 points, missing out on the UEFA Cup by a solitary point. Despite their fullback, Stephen Hunt, not being a player I particularly like, I appreciate the spirit that this team brought to the Premier League. They were like a duck to water and could have finished even higher. The second season was less successful though, and Reading were relegated back to the Championship following a loss in form in the second half of the season. Despite winning 4-0 away to fellow strugglers Derby County on the last day of the season, Fulham's 1-0 victory at Portsmouth was enough to see the club fall out of the top flight. Jubilation for Fulham and Roy Hodgson, but despair for Reading and Coppell. Reading had intent for an immediate return in the Premier League where they had a 15-match unbeaten home run in the 2008-09 season until losing to Southampton. In the second half of that season though, they struggled to regain the form and slipped down the table before recovering to finish in 4th and to qualify for the playoffs. They eventually lost to Burnley in the semi-final. Manager Steve Coppell resigned just hours after the game, being replaced by former academy manager Brendan Rodgers. However, Rodgers was still barely finding his feet after leaving Chelsea as a reserve team manager. Rodgers just could not live up to the expectations of Reading. He left the club by mutual consent on 16th of December 2009. He left because following a poor start to the season, Reading was seen in a relegation battle. Brian McDermott was made surprise caretaker manager on the same day. He was given a job on a full-time basis following an upset, a 2-1 extra time win over Liverpool at Anfield in the FA Cup. Gylfi Sigurdsson and Shane Long cancelling out Ryan Bertrand's opener. Reading reached the quarterfinals of the competition for the first time since 1927. They eventually lost 4-2 to Aston Villa at the Medeski Stadium. John Carew was the hero for Villa, scoring a hat-trick, and Martin O'Neill's team progressed to the semi-final. In the following season in the domestic cup competitions, Reading beat West Brom, Stevenage and Everton to reach the quarterfinal of the FA Cup for a second successive season, where they eventually lost 1-0 to Manchester City at the City of Manchester Stadium. Micah Richards was the one that broke Reading's heart. It was a good fight and crazy to think that the opposing team would become champions of the Premier League the following year. In the league, Reading finished 5th in the Championship to qualify for the division playoffs. After beating Cardiff in the semi-finals, they lost 4-2 in the final again, this time to Swansea City at Wembley. I've lost count how many finals Reading have lost, at least 3 or 4. Reading started the 2011-12 season by selling captain Matt Mills and player of the season Shane Long. Early results were not favourable for the club and they were sat second bottom of the table after 6 games. However, the board kept faith in McDermott, and a streak of good form in the second half of the season combined with the signing of Adam Lafondra, who scored 12 goals, ensured promotion to the Premier League on the 17th of April 2012 with a 1-0 home win against Nottingham Forest. In their next match on the 21st of April 2012, Reading secured the Championship title with a game to spare after a 2-2 draw with Crystal Palace, when second place Southampton failed to beat Middlesbrough, losing 2-1. Away from games on the pitch, on 21st of January 2012, it was announced that John Medeski planned to sell 51% of the club to Thames Sport Investments, led by Russian-born Anton Sigavevich. I don't think I've said that right, but it was eventually completed on the 29th of May 2012. On the 30th of October 2012, Reading created a very unwanted record in the last 16 of the League Cup. You may know what game I'm already referencing. They took a 4-0 lead against Arsenal. 37 minutes. Arsenal drew 4-4 in stoppage time to take the match to extra time. Reading eventually lost the game 7-5 after extra time. Reading became the first club in the league or FA Cup to have scored 5 goals in the match and to have still lost. It was a mad game. I remembered watching this game at the time and I remember shouting at the Reading team saying that they had no backbone. How could they have had a backbone going 4-0 up and then conceding 7? And unfortunately, this was also symbolised in their league campaign. They lacked the backbone to survive. At the end of the 2012-13 season, Reading were relegated back to the Championship following a 0-0 draw with relegation rivals Queen's Park Rangers. This game sealed the same fate to both clubs. But their adventurous FA Cup runs were just a common trait of Reading Football Club. On the 17th of March 2015, Reading beat Bradford City 3-0 at Medeski in an FA Cup quarter-final replay to advance to the semis for the FA Cup for the first time since 1927. The Royals were eventually defeated by Premier League Arsenal 2-1 after extra time to end the club's run in the competition. As with their league form since being relegated to the Championship, they finished 7th, 19th and 17th respectively, going through managers such as Nigel Atkins and Steve Clark. In the 2015-16 season, Reading became so desperate that McDermott made a return as an interim manager. Between 2015 and 2016, Reading had 4 managers. The club were in absolute turmoil, going through the managerial merry-go-round, until eventually the club opted for the infamous Man United player Jaap Stam as their new manager on the 13th of June 2016. In his first season of management, Jaap Stam unbelievably achieved great things. He got Reading to finish in the playoffs following a 3rd place finish. The Royals narrowly beat Fulham 2-1 on aggregate. They beat the finals to get promoted. All they needed to do was to beat Huddersfield Town and they were in the Premier League. The game ended 0-0 on Wembley, 29th of May 2017. Huddersfield, however, defeated Reading 4-3 on penalties to deny the club a return to the Premier League. Agonising defeat for Reading Football Club and another playoff final loss. Unfortunately afterwards, the wheels fell off. Jaap Stam was sacked, then to be replaced by Paul Clement, who did what he had to do and kept the club from relegation. Following a very poor start in the 2018-19 season, Paul Clement was sacked and replaced by an unknown Portuguese entity, Jose Gomes. He had great effect and Medeski became a fortress after Reading only lost 2 home games since he took over in the end of the 2018-19 season. Then we arrived to this season, where Reading have continued their current trend, starting poorly and replacing a manager. They now have their football director Mark Bowen as their manager. Questionable as it may be, Reading have looked a lot better. John Swift, Ovie Ejaria, Rafael Cabral, and when he's on it, John Puskas are talented. Just to name a few, Reading are 14th right now, 8 points from the playoffs. The playoff pace may be unreachable now, but can Reading fulfill their destiny and allow their performances to speak louder than words and to have a very successful season next year? Only time will tell. Just make sure to make more of a fight if you are promoted to the Premier League, Reading. And that concludes Chapter 4 of Football Fairytales. A very touching and very intriguing tale we uncovered with Reading FC. Sidru, I hope you are satisfied with his chapter. Everyone give Sidru a subscribe for suggesting Chapter 4 today. But as always for Alexis, it would be deeply appreciated if you gave this video a like. And to please subscribe if you're new around here. Remember, the goal is to hit 150 subscribers by 2 weeks. This small trek will eventually edge us closer to our eventual goal of 1,000 subscribers. But to end from the Storyteller, I've done my bit. Would you guys want to be featured in Chapter 5 in his voice book? Let me know in the comments. Thank you guys so much for listening. Alexis says you are legendary if you heard the end of his voice book. And as always, stay safe, keep healthy, and love one another. Once everyone can understand Black Lives Matter, we can start promoting that all lives matter. Everyone seriously, show love, not hate. Take care everyone. Peace.